I call on Professor N.N. Sharma to make a presentation to Professor Mahajan. So, Mr. Avasthi, please make a presentation to Professor Mahajan.
It's a great pleasure for me.
I call on Professor Sharma to make a presentation to Mr. Amitabh Pandey. I call on Mr. Dalbir Singh to make a presentation to Professor Donny Arora. And I call on Dr. G.N. Trivedi to make a presentation to Mr. Samir Sharan. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we now move to the business of this panel. And I'd like to call on Professor Panda to make the presentation.
Distinguished guests, and co-panelists, I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to express my views in this forum. The maybe first couple of minutes one might say that the planning commission that is disbanded now, did it make some mark, and where it didn't, given its own objectives, it possibly didn't have several objectives which it should have got. I think in the early days, in the 60s for example, it did make a mark in giving a direction to the planning. The way Professor Mahalnavis or Pitambar Pant, they articulated the growth process for a developing country, a newly independent country, that possibly gave some vision. It was, whether it was relevant at that stage or not, that is a matter of debate. But certainly, by mid-70s, we should have changed that vision, which we did not. I think the other thing where the Planning Commission role was very much visible or debated was, apart from the growth process, whether it had certain intellectual inputs into the distributional aspects. And here again, sometime in the mid-70s when Professor Sukama Chakravarti was there, that time they did try to integrate into the old plan models, which no more are possibly relevant, how to integrate into an overall growth framework the distributional aspects, whether it is self-employment or whether it is wage-based employment. That possibly was again contribution of the Indian intellectuals into the world of knowledge. But what is the major failure of the entire process? I think they are already discussed in the earlier session, and I would only point out one or two things. One is, even now, some of the recent government data itself shows that 40% of our farmers do not want to remain as farmers. That itself, shows the failure of the planning. If planning was supposed to be an integrated approach, providing benefits to all sections of the people, why is it that 40% of our farmers do not want to remain as farmers? And where are the opportunities for them? It is this aspect, the employment creation aspect in non-agriculture, that possibly the entire process last 55, 60 years we have neglected. That is one aspect. The second aspect possibly is on the poverty front, that okay, on the growth maybe we are slowly, we started at the time of independence, as previous speakers were speaking in the first session, there was hardly any per capita income growth. We started with 2-3% and slowly moved up. Nothing succeeds like success, and we had accelerated growth over the years. But on the distributional front, obviously the aspirations of all the sections of the people were not getting reflected in the entire process. If we take some of these things as the basic observations of the failure, how do we move around? How do we move forward? The Planning Commission, obviously now it is well recognized that the allocative role of the Planning Commission need not be there. In the old age, when centralized planning was there, when the public sector had the commanding heights in the economy, maybe it made some sense with 60-70% of the total investment coming from the government. But now it is no more than 15-20%. And that too for specific sectors. So that part certainly can be taken out in the new process. Give it to the respective ministries, the finance ministry and the respective line departments, they can take care of that. And whatever with the new structure, that doesn't have to be burdened with that. But this other second role it played, as an organization coordinating policies. Again, one might have, depending on which period and which policy we look at, there are successes, there are large failures also. But that role possibly, some organization have to play. It is not that in all countries they have. Most of the countries, several countries they have. But even in countries like Canada, where they don't have an overall coordinating agency, they do have at the sectoral level. They may not have, they are at a higher level of income now. They may not need how to coordinate the growth policies, but at the sectoral level like health or education, they do have coordinating bodies because they are also federal system. And you do have to interact with other departments, even for the action of one department. But this role, I will argue that it doesn't have to be by one body. It could be decentralized. The overall, but so far as the think tank job of another agency, you know. But again, here I will say that there are two aspects. One is how to develop the country as a whole, that is one thing, but also the relationship between the center and the states, because often that is creating problem. The aspirations of the states must get reflected, and no centralized thinking, body of thinking can solve that problem. It has to be decentralized. It has to assimilate people from different classes, and maybe if we strengthen and make it more effective, the National Development Council or some other organization like that, that could possibly play a major role in reshaping the center-state relation. But so far as coordination of overall macroeconomic policies are concerned, that possibly has to be done by a body that essentially replaces the current think tank work of the Planning Commission. Here we need to look into several aspects. First, as the global environment changes, we need to change. For example, in 2008, when the global crisis came, and about a year before that, possibly nobody predicted that, or if some people predicted, nobody took it seriously. The government has to suddenly act how to meet that challenge. They had to develop different scenarios because nobody knew what the economy will be in 2010, or even the world economic situation will be like in 2010 or 11. So 3-4 years ahead, you have to think about different scenario developments. It doesn't have to be just global economy. It could be weather. It could be natural calamities, and also certain other factors like international oil prices. Keeping all these factors in mind, how to develop scenarios which the loss of confidence that happened in the previous system, that could be restored and the government as a whole can move forward. But what are the major new areas which any think tank or the government as a whole, while implementing the things, must focus? Again, here the previous speakers have given different indications on that, and I do broadly agree with that. Nutrition and sanitation must get priority. Employment generation has to be a major thing that possibly has been neglected all through in almost all the 12 plans except maybe the 7th plan when in 77, 78, around that time. But I would also point out another aspects, the new problem that is emerging in the social sectors, the problems faced by the aged population, the old age people, and there it is not providing employment, it is possibly providing some kind of social security. How do we meet that? That will be a major problem in the coming years, and this problem must be addressed. And here I must also say that it is not a question of just resources. It is not a question of consulting some economist like me. You have to consult the sociologists, you have to consult the psychologists, how to provide them some kind of happiness in the old age, and how do we meet some of their minimum needs. I think that is going to be a major thing which we have neglected all through, and in the next 10-15 years possibly this issue will come up. The extent only, the seriousness only will be enlarged in the coming decades. But there are also, talking of the think tank, there are also other issues, like the trade-off between growth and distribution. Certain policies may have a trade-off, but there are also possibly policies which can have a win and win effect on both growth and distribution policies. And the statecraft lies in how to reconcile these two and how to make it effective both from growth and distributional point of view. I think these are some of my general thoughts, but I'll only at the end I'll say that when the goals are many for any society and the instruments are only few, that time the role of coordination, it has to be even, it plays a much more role, in the sense that if you don't have sufficient instruments, through negotiations, by reconciliation, you can design indirect instruments. They may not play as much role as one instrument or as many targets as instruments, when people say. But in practice, we do not have that many instruments. The same, as I was telling, the growth and distribution, even if there is a trade-off, possibly there are other areas where we can have a favorable effect on both counts. And those designs of different things, getting this negotiation process so that it is acceptable to all, possibly these are areas where the new think tank must play a major role. And that think tank, being an economist, I must also admit that the think tank should not be dominated only by economists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Panda. I now call on Professor Mahajan for remarks. Just for the benefit of people on the panel, I should have established the rules before. In my notepad, I have a page that says 5 minutes, and I have a page that says 2 minutes, and I have a page that says stop, just in terms of time allocation. So please don't take it personally if I show you these cards.
Thank you, Rupak, for starting with me about the rules.
No, but Dr. Panda, to his credit, stayed very much within his time.
Yeah, no, I saw
You saw my cards.
I didn't see the film.
सम्मानित मंच और उतने ही सम्मानित इस सभागार में उपस्थित प्रबुद्ध नागरिकजन, भाइयों बहनों, आज हम प्रधानमंत्री के उस वक्तव्य जो उन्होंने 15 अगस्त को लाल किले की प्राचीर से दिया कि एक नया घर बनाने की ज़रूरत है, क्योंकि पुराने घर में जब कुछ मुरम्मत की ज़रूरत पड़ती है तो उससे बेहतर है कि एक नया घर बना दिया जाए। तो उस नए घर की रचना के संदर्भ में हम यहाँ पर आज सलाह मशवरा करने के लिए एकत्र हुए हैं। और भाई राकेश सिन्हा जी ने कहा भी कि लगभग ऐसा तय हो गया था कि घोषणा होने वाली थी, लेकिन रोकी गई है। तो मुझे लगता है कि आज की इस बातचीत से ज़रूर कुछ न कुछ इनपुट्स लेकर के प्रधानमंत्री और उनकी सलाहकार परिषद, कौन लोग हैं मालूम नहीं, उसमें कुछ न कुछ फेरबदल और कुछ बेहतर करने का प्रयास करेंगे। मात्र संयोग ही नहीं है, लेकिन आज जब हम इस बात की चर्चा कर रहे हैं कि प्लानिंग कमीशन को बदला जाए, नया रूप लाया जाए, नया अवतार लाया जाए, तो आज हम दीनदयाल उपाध्याय जी के 50वें वर्ष की भी तैयारी कर रहे हैं। मैं दीनदयाल जी का नाम इसलिए यहां पर ले रहा हूं कि एक प्लानिंग कमीशन जिसके बारे में उन्होंने 1958 में 2 प्लान्स करके एक पुस्तक लिखी और आज उस पुस्तक के नए रूप में उसको आज ही उसका विमोचन भी होना है, यह भी एक कार्यक्रम है। तो ये मात्र संयोग नहीं है, कुछ ईश्वरीय योजना भी होती है। तो वास्तव में जो मैं चूंकि अर्थशास्त्र का विद्यार्थी हूँ और अर्थशास्त्र की जो ट्रेनिंग हमने अपने महाविद्यालय से और उसके बाद दिल्ली स्कूल ऑफ इकोनॉमिक्स से ली, तो जो प्लानिंग हमें समझाई गई और जो चीज़ें हमें पढ़ाई जाती रही, उसको देख करके कुछ अकुलाहट सी तब भी होती थी और अब भी होती है जब हम पढ़ाते हैं। जब योजना बनाते हैं, प्लानिंग में कुछ इक्वेशंस सॉल्व करने का प्रयास होता है। सुखमय चक्रवर्ती जी ने भी हमें वही समझाया और बाकी लोगों ने भी हमें वही समझाया अपने क्लासरूम लेक्चर्स में। लेकिन साथ ही साथ हमारे एक और प्राध्यापक हमें लुईस मॉडल भी पढ़ा रहे थे। एक और योजना चल रही है, योजना के अनुरूप उत्पादन कैसे किया जाए, इनपुट्स कहाँ से आए, आउटपुट कितना होगा, उससे रोजगार का कितना सृजन होगा, शायद उसका विचार कम था। लेकिन यह बात जरूर की गई कि वो एक तरफ प्लानिंग चल रही थी, मॉडल चल रहे थे, प्लानिंग मॉडल चल रहे थे, दूसरी तरफ लुईस मॉडल चल रहा था कि गांवों में रोजगार का सृजन नहीं हो रहा, गांवों में रोजगार नहीं है। हमारे यहां एक विशेष प्रकार की अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट की समस्या है जिसको डिस्गाइज अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट कहते हैं, छुपी हुई बेरोजगारी कहते हैं। और उस छुपी हुई बेरोजगारी को संसाधन के रूप में इस्तेमाल करना है तो उसके लिए लुईस मॉडल परफेक्ट है। हम उनको उनके डोर स्टेप पर, उनके घर के पास रोजगार दे दें, कुछ सृजन हो जाए, कुछ परिसंपत्तियों का, कुछ उत्पादन तंत्र बढ़ जाए, गांवों में खुशहाली आ जाए। विचार अच्छा था लेकिन कुछ हो न सका। आज भी मनरेगा है, पैसे बांटे जाते हैं, लेकिन किसी भी प्रकार के जिसको हम कहें कि कोई परिसंपत्तियां जिससे आगे चल करके उत्पादन बढ़ सकता है, वो नहीं हो रहा। यही प्लानिंग की प्रक्रिया रही जब 1970 में 45% जीडीपी कृषि से आती थी, आज 13.6% आती है। अभी बदल गया, इस साल में 13.9% आ गई, लेकिन लगभग डाउन ट्रेंड ही रहा है। तो जब ये सब हम देखते हैं, लोग तो लगभग उतने ही बचे हैं गांवों में, कृषि में थोड़ा बहुत कमी आई है, कहें कि 53-54% है, लेकिन 53-54% के पास मात्र 14%, तो कुछ ना कुछ तो सोचना पड़ेगा ना। कहीं ना कहीं जब हम कहते हैं कि भी किसी बच्चे को एक क्लास से दूसरी क्लास में उससे आगे बढ़ाना है, तो उसका रिपोर्ट कार्ड तो देखना होगा। तो रिपोर्ट कार्ड देखते हैं तो पता चलता है कि कोई तालमेल ही नहीं है। ग्रोथ की बात होती, हम 8% 9% ग्रोथ कर देंगे, लेकिन रोजगार कहां है? रोजगार विहीन विकास का मतलब क्या है इस देश के लिए? मुझे दुख होता है जब हमारे नीति निर्माता पहले भी यही कहते थे और आज भी यही कहते हैं कि फॉर ग्रोथ टू टेक प्लेस सम पीपल हैव टू सफर, सम पीपल हैव टू सेक्रीफाइस। लेकिन वो हर बार गरीब ही सेक्रीफाइस क्यों करे? गरीब ही रोजगार से बाहर क्यों रहे, ये बात विचार करने वाली है। तो मित्रों, हमें उस वेक्टर और मैट्रिक्स एनालिसिस से बाहर आकर के एक जिसको कहें कि होलिस्टिक तरीके से सोचने की जरूरत है। यही बात मैंने जब अपनी बात शुरू की दीनदयाल जी के नाम से, तो उस होलिस्टिक अप्रोच का नाम है दीनदयाल उपाध्याय का एकात्म मानववाद। वो प्लानिंग की बात नहीं करते, वो अखंड मंडलाकार रचना की बात करते हैं कि एक व्यक्ति है, समाज है, ब्रह्मांड है। आज हम अभी पूर्व एक वक्ता ने बहुत अच्छे तरीके से कहा कि हम कहीं ना कहीं कंपार्टमेंट्स में बटे हुए हैं और चर्चा ही नहीं कर रहे होलिस्टिक की। तो युग बदल गया है, ये बात का भी ध्यान रखना होगा कि आज के युग में जो प्राइवेटाइजेशन का जोर चल रहा है, अडानी और अंबानी, कुछ और भी नाम जोड़ सकते हैं, उनसे बाहर आकर आम जन के लाभ के लिए, आम जन के वेलफेयर के लिए क्या हम कोई रचना की बात सोच सकते हैं क्या? मैं होलिस्टिक अप्रोच के बारे में केवल एक एनालॉजी, एक उदाहरण के साथ उसको पुष्ट करूंगा। आप जानते हैं कि दिल्ली में मेट्रो बन रही, और आप ये जानते हैं कि मेट्रो में जो पहले बात आई, उन्होंने कहा कि इसको मीटर गेज में बनाना होगा। लेकिन रेलवे मंत्रालय ने कहा कि ये तो सही नहीं है, हमारे पास ब्रॉड गेज की सभी प्रकार की व्यवस्थाएं उपलब्ध हैं, तो ये मीटर गेज में क्यों बने, इसको तो ब्रॉड गेज में बनना चाहिए। फिर एक ग्रुप ऑफ मिनिस्टर बना, थोड़ा सा होलिस्टिक अप्रोच आई, और मुझे ध्यान है कि उस समय के पूर्व उस समय के जो उप प्रधानमंत्री थे, he put his foot down, no, it has to be broad gauge, और वो ब्रॉड गेज बनी, और भारत की जो क्षमताएं हैं उसका उपयोग हो सका। ये तो केवल एक उदाहरण है। तो इस प्रकार के होलिस्टिक अप्रोच को अडॉप्ट करते हुए एक नई प्रकार की रचना का निर्माण, और प्लानिंग कमीशन इस रूप में रहे या ना रहे, लेकिन वो आम जन के हित के लिए काम करे। मैं अंतिम अपने स्वदेशी जागरण मंच के, जिससे मैं आता हूं, उसके संस्थापक और एक हमारे विचार परिवार के एक बड़े आइडियोलॉग दत्तोपंत ठेंगड़ी की एक वक्तव्य के साथ इस विषय को विराम दूंगा। उन्होंने एक पुस्तक का फॉरवर्ड लिखते हुए ये कहा कि हम जो कंपार्टमेंट में चीजों को सोचते हैं कि ग्रोथ इतने % हो जाएगी, फिर आउटपुट की बात करते हैं, फिर हम प्राइसेस की बात करते हैं, फिर अलग से हम एम्प्लॉयमेंट की बात करते हैं, उसके लिए मनरेगा करते हैं। अगर इस देश में आर्थिक नीति को सफल होना है तो एक होलिस्टिक इंटीग्रेटेड अप्रोच की जरूरत है, जिसमें आउटपुट भी हो, प्राइसेस भी हो, एम्प्लॉयमेंट भी हो, और विदेशी व्यापार के सभी प्रकार का साम्य, चाहे वो बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट है, चाहे वो बैलेंस ऑफ ट्रेड है, तमाम प्रकार की सभी, जिसको हम आर्थिक डेटास कहते हैं, उन सब को एक समन्वित रूप से देखने की जरूरत है। there has to be an integrated approach towards output, employment, prices, to quote him, and other, so that the people at large should be benefited. ऐसा ही कुछ रूप आगे निकल कर के आएगा, इसी आशा के साथ मैं अपना वक्तव्य यहाँ समाप्त करता हूँ.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahajan. I now call on Amitabh Pandey to make his presentation.
Mr. Chairman, co-panelists, friends. In case you're wondering, I've been wearing jackets in this vibrant colour long before the Prime Minister decided to. So he's stolen my wardrobe, not I. Anyway, being the third speaker in a crowded session just before lunch compels me to be brief. So here's a rapid-fire listing of issues as I see them and some suggestions on what can be done in the immediate future and in the medium term. First, although one should not speak ill of the dead, first I have to express my deep satisfaction at the demise of the Planning Commission. It was long needed, and the PM has shown his willingness to be surgically bold in getting rid of the unwanted. In doing so, he has opened up a great opportunity for radically reforming the way in which policies, strategies, and action plans are formulated and designed at the national level, the way policies are coordinated, and the way in which consultations are done with multiple stakeholders and consensus built. What is wrong or was wrong with the existing setup and existing ways of policy making? I list the following in a random order. First, the federal dimension is sorely missing. There is a centralized thinking mindset, and states, local governments, and grassroots organizations are treated as recipient beneficiaries of central dispensations rather than as partners in a collective, collaborative endeavor. Stakeholder consultation happens after policies, strategies, and programs have been framed and not before. Lack of capacity at the state and local levels is used as an argument to deny their participation in the policy-making processes. Financial assistance is structured in a manner in which to perpetuate dependence on the centre, and hence the states and local governments are not seen as claimants to participation in policy and plan formulation as equals. Policies are made with a narrow sectoral focus, and cross-sectoral linkages are ignored. Protecting departmental turfs is more important than addressing a multidimensional problem, requiring a multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral, multi-departmental approach to troubleshooting and problem solving. Stakeholder consultation is half-hearted, and the consultation processes are archaic, poorly and haphazardly structured, bureaucratic, and done more for the sake of form than for any genuine exchange of thoughts and views. No use is made of existing institutional fora for interaction in a non-confrontational and convivial manner without political posturing. Parliamentary consultation and consultation with political parties is generally avoided until after policies have been formulated and are done at a stage where major changes as a result of this interaction cannot be made without derailing the entire exercise. The Planning Commission and the NDC was disproportionately focused on economic and financial policy issues, with other matters being left to the devices of the individual ministry departments concerned in terms of concentration and consensus building. As a consequence, most proposals other than plan-related came unstuck at the stage when political approvals became necessary. There is a huge divide between research and policy, and there is no institutional bridging mechanism. Little emphasis is placed on specially commissioned interdisciplinary research which can feed into policy. In the absence of proper bridging mechanisms, the policy relevance of much research output is inadequate, The anchorage role which needs to be provided for research processes to be really useful is missing, and there is little, no capacity for synthesizing research inputs, and integration skills are extremely weak. The urgent invariably takes precedence over the important, as there is no institution which can devote its full attention to long-term thinking unperturbed by current crises. So what do? The Planning Commission has very useful assets, particularly in terms of expert manpower, institutional memory, networks, and physical infrastructure. These must be used and redeployed without fracturing and fragmenting them. There are basically just two options: either create a new institution which takes over the Planning Commission assets and gives it a completely new remit, somewhat like what was attempted with the NAC, the PM's Economic Advisory Committee, etc., or use one of the existing institutions and revamp it completely to overcome the problems listed above. The biggest disadvantage in creating a new institution is that institutions take time to acquire legitimacy and acceptability, and precious time can be lost in simply working out arrangements by which a new institution can make its presence felt and its usefulness demonstrable. This becomes especially difficult when an institution has primarily an advisory role with little by way of administrative or political clout. The advantage is that it can create its own rules of the game and not have to be burdened with an outdated legacy. But there exists a unique opportunity to reuse an existing institution which has been grossly underused, but which has a huge potential because of its unquestioned legitimacy provided by the Constitution, and which in its initial years, when it was active in processing the Sarkaria Commission recommendations, was perceived by all the states to be very useful. That institution is the Interstate Council, a unique mechanism under Article 263 of the Constitution, which brings together the Union and the states in a partnership arrangement for identifying issues of common concern, investigating them, and arriving at agreed policy recommendations. The Council is chaired by the Prime Minister, as all the Chief Ministers and selected ministers of the Union as members. So while the constitutional provision had existed from the very beginning, the Council was constituted only in 1990, when the Sarkaria Commission highlighted its potential usefulness, and a non-Congress government seized the opportunity to set it up. However, despite its potential, it has been dead most of the time. In the 10 years of UPA rule, the Council had 2 meetings, the last one being in December 2006. Every opportunity for using the Council for its basic purpose, policy making as a consultative and participatory federal process, was buffed, with the centre preferring to go into a sulk each time it was shown a middle finger by the states. To revive it and revamp it, to be able to fulfill its true potential, the Prime Minister needs to do the following: merge the National Development Council with the Interstate Council and transfer the assets of the Planning Commission to the Council Secretariat. Transfer the financial allocation functions entirely to the Finance Commission without any distinction being made between plan and non-plan resources. Create a second tier as an expert panel on the lines of the Planning Commission with the following remit: formulation of cross-sectoral policies and programs on matters of common interest, developing institutional mechanisms for implementation of such policies, consensus building on contentious policy issues, policy coordination, and setting standards across states for implementation and developing performance parameters and overseeing the implementation of Finance Commission recommendations. Convert the Interstate Council into independent statutory body like the Election Commission. Transfer the existing manpower assets of the Planning Commission to strengthen its policy research and investigation capacity. Have the Council establish a networking relationship with policy research, social and economic research institutions across the country to enable independent research inputs to go into policy making and bridge the research policy divide. Have the revamped ISC serve as an umbrella for special purpose vehicles in partnership with the states for mega national initiatives such as the cleaning of the Ganga or the integrated development of the Himalayas. And eventually make the recommendation of the Council binding on all its members. So in the immediate term, the following steps need to be taken: relocate the Interstate Council Secretariat from its parking slot in the MHA to the PMO. This requires No changes in the rules. The PM is the chairman of the council and the secretary reports to him. Amend the presidential order through a simple cabinet decision to create a second tier of experts on the lines of the members of the Planning Commission to bring in eminent domain expertise, especially with advanced skills in integrating research inputs. The amendment of the presidential order can be done instantly. It does not require prolonged legislative scrutiny, as it is a simple executive order under the Constitution. Have the ISC Secretary take over the complete assets of the Planning Commission, again through an executive order. Task the revamped council to work out a medium-term strategy for making the council eventually into a statutory body. This entire process can be completed in a matter of days, and the revamped council can begin functioning by the beginning of the new year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amitabh. I'd like now to call on Professor Arora.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this audience on a subject that is controversial and that is also very provocative. Since morning we have been hearing a lot about Planning Commission and what is going to replace the Planning Commission. This session is going to be focused on enabling institution for development. So I think the first requisite to be talking about such an institution is to resolve the idea of development itself. Not many people would agree to what development is, and different people have different perception of what development would be or should be. It is actually the context in which a person is placed that defines the vision of that person regarding development. It's the local needs, the immediate needs of the individual that define the vision and perceptions or even expectations regarding development that the person has. And because people in India are placed in diverse contexts, not just in terms of resource ownership, but also in terms of opportunities, in terms of capacities, in terms of a lot of other things, there are diverse and many visions of development that they have. And that itself makes development a contested domain. It is possible to resolve it through deliberations, through negotiations, but sometimes it's also desirable to resolve it by thinking in terms of alternative visions and pathways. Yeah. Okay. Is that okay? You can hear me? Okay. So development is a collective endeavor for improved way of life for all. That is what I would think of it to be. And in that, everyone has to contribute, everyone has to participate, and everyone has to get the benefits also. Now, when conceived and interpreted in terms of narrow economistic, technocentric, reductionist fashion, projecting aggregate gains, overlooking alienation, marginalization, disengagement, exploitation that may have accompanied it or that may have followed it, we end up having debates on rights claims, priorities, allocation patterns, and mechanisms. This kind of debates are bound to be there when we are not ready to take into account some of the processes that have taken shape and just focus on the things that we think is development and can be considered to be development. Development conflicts have grown over the last few years, not just because of increasing awareness of rights, but also because of negative fallouts of policy. And where these are being concentrated in locations, we see that very clearly in the form of protests and demands for something else. There is a need for taking a holistic view of development and try and ensure that there is sectoral integration, but besides that, also engagement with the wider society, larger society, which includes people in different positions. Decentralized decision making can be one instrument through which some of this can be attained, and we attempted that. We had 73rd Amendment, 74th Amendment. We talked about empowering panchayats and all that, but we know that planning and resource allocation processes remained quite centralized. There has not been much of decentralization that we thought would take place. Planning Commission has been accused of politicization when it comes to allocations, bureaucratization when it comes to giving approvals. It has been blamed for interference, excessive interference, and it has also been blamed for ineffectiveness when it comes to delivery of results. All these flaws definitely have been there, and we have to ensure that this does not happen in future. Planning Commission has contributed in some ways through working groups, through task forces, through various kinds of exercises, monitoring of plans, evaluation of plans, and informing thereby the nation about the failures of plans and policies that have been there. But when we look at the reality, there are many persisting problems that we see. We see poverty, we see food insecurity when seen from the viewpoint of the people. Many people are not able to have 2 meals a day, even now, despite all the programs and policies that have taken shape. There are problems related to education, health, manufacturing, environment. Various sectors have seen a lot of problems emerging and continuing. This necessitates some rethinking, and it is important to rethink seriously about what needs to be done. Planning Commission also had another problem, which was contradictory pulls within the plans. Economic planning and social adverse effects of policies and programs and how these need to be dealt with. How policy impacts different social groups, how it impacts gender, all these concerns are extremely relevant, and we need to have systematic analysis and plans to address these issues effectively, not just by planning, but also ensuring that these plans are implemented. Partnership with public, partnership with people is important. I've been hearing a lot about think tanks, but I feel that we need to look at every citizen as think tank, and we need to value the thinking of every citizen of India, because that thinking comes from the experiences, that thinking comes from the immediate concerns that the person has, and it is much more effective in delivering what needs to be delivered than our isolated and centralized plans. Centralized plans need to be taking into account all those aspects of planning which take shape at local level, at state level, and other levels in the state. Multi-level planning and coordination efforts are crucial. Finance Commission can take over the allocative role that Planning Commission has been performing. I agree with the previous speakers who have mentioned that. And the criteria, I feel, should incorporate more of equity and special needs concerns so that the issues related to that are also effectively dealt with. NDC, I feel, maybe strengthen zonal councils, aggregate various kinds of experiences, and can provide a basis where or some of the needs of present planning scenario. There is this issue of color of politics that we all know about. because all institutions, when we are talking about interstate coordination and cooperation and arriving at agreement, politics does have its color, and it's going to impact upon what is happening there and how things are taken forward. But then public perception of plans and policies and public experience of success of or failure of plans and policies is definitely going to be the final deciding factor. Therefore, I assume that politics will not go that far to distort the possibilities of this. The need is actually to balance democratic trust and technical expertise, and there I do not deny the relevance of common persons, because they also have a lot of traditional knowledge, a lot of skills, and these need to be put to good use to ensure that the benefits are delivered to them only. I'm not talking about caste-based occupations, but I'm talking about the skills that people have because of the way they have been contributing to the development of local situations. There is a need to avoid duplication and ensure coordination and consultation and conflict resolution mechanisms. That is the most important thing that we require, and integrate whatever planning and implementation takes place with the concerns of the people at large. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Arora. I'd like to call on Samir Sharan.
Thank you, Rupert. Thank you, Rakesh ji, for inviting me, and Rahul for making sure I got here. My first degree was an engineering degree, so I'm largely going to be agnostic towards actors. I'm going to focus on the processes and the systems that need to be in place. And actually what we are discussing here is not really the shape of an institution, but what we are discussing here is the decision of our economic orientation over the next 50 years. If in 1950, when the Planning Commission was established, we decided that India would be a unitary, centrally, closely planned economy, it was an economic decision. Socio-economic contours of India unfolded because of that decision taken in 1950. So the institution we shape today is actually going to decide where India wants to be in the next few decades. What should its preferences be? Should it be a market economy? Should it be a social market economy? Should it be a closed economy? Should it focus on liberating the regions and allowing states to choose their own destinies? Should it be a more controlled and managed form of economy where still New Delhi will hold sway over 30 different countries that constitute India? Those are decisions that need to be made today as the new institution is set up. So what I'm going to do is, since much of going forward, the largest part of India's wealth will not be within the territory of India. And if we are to assume that this is something that is inevitable, then economic planning has to factor in wealth created overseas, has to factor in innovation and other instruments that will allow India to create wealth overseas. It has to start thinking about long-term goals when it conducts multilateral negotiations and engagements at various forums. India is now intrinsically a global nation, and economic planning has to take consideration of this reality. Second, when we talk about employment, yes, in the next 20 years, we will be responding to a youth bulge of 500 million, which will peak around in the 2030s. But at the same time, we will also have to respond to a old age bulge. We will have 300 million Indians reaching 60 years of age. And we have to start making calls now. Are we going to be a European-styled economy, where we have to create pension plans and state security plans for those who are above 60? Are we going to choose the American model, where we look at employment continuance, which means you can't be retired for age, which means your age cannot be the reason for you being sent out of work? But we'll have to respond to that reality. And by 2050, this number of 300 million will be much larger. And then this becomes a real problem. And certainly the institution we create today is going to be deciding India's fate in 2050. So we have to start thinking about it right now. The third is the inevitable arbitration of governance by markets, whether we like it or not. Markets, private sector, Ambanis, Adanis, maybe multiple SMEs, maybe smaller units, are going to appropriate many of the governance functions such as health, education, water, sanitation, and even security. So how do you include market within a largely traditional state-oriented conversation? That is the third trend that this institution must start to respond to. And of course, there are three parts of the spectrum again. If you look at the roles of markets, you can again be an American system where markets are governance, and Obamacare tried to respond to and course correct on that particular front. You could look at social markets, such as in Europe, where private sector delivers, but it is managed through a regulatory framework created by the state, such as Germany. Or you could be a tightly controlled, inefficient, closed, government-run governance framework, where we all see where we are in 60 years or 67 years of being a nation. The third trend is basically, where do we want to be in terms of